All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 8th meeting of the Pembroke School Committee. We will call it to order at 7:02 p.m. Just a couple things just so everybody's aware. Meeting is recorded, obviously, being shown on PAC TV, Titan TV, online, through YouTube. Also, we record it for our minutes. If you do have questions, please send them in real time to scinfo@pembrokek12.org. We will, the superintendent's monitoring the mailbox. It's the easiest way for us to get questions and still stay interactive with the public. Unfortunately, with Zoom and everything, it's not a great technology for our setup here, which is why we changed formats. So with that, we have only one visitor. Mrs. Bollinger is here to observe. I don't think she has anything she wants to talk about on the agenda right now. Just give a quick nod. Okay. Just real quick before we jump in I'll throw it under communications, two things. One is you may have seen at graduation the letter that went out on the cars to seniors with regard to the financial literacy training that is being run via Rockland Trust. If people are interested, please reach out to Kim McKenna, who is organizing that program. It's a great program. We could not run it during the year because of COVID. So, but if you're interested, seniors, it's a great program to learn about financial literacy. Okay. Second thing we have, the River Marsh 40B project update. Real quick, I think everybody saw the letter that went out a couple years ago about the project. There is a ZBA meeting tonight, and there's still activity going on with the overall program or project. At the time, there was a slightly different feeling on the number of units and age restriction, not age restriction. So what we're doing now, what I'm asking if the committee is interested in writing a second follow-up letter to the ZBA and Representative Cutler and Senator Moran to express concern, or at least let them know the impact to the schools. The reason why, and then I'll stop and pause, we had Pembroke Woods. Pembroke Woods was only slated to have an impact of about 20 to 30 children on the schools, and we have how many?
We have 86 kids.
We have, okay, 86, because when they looked at it, they looked at the units, they said 2-bedroom units will not have a lot of children, and they used their methodology and estimated about 20 to 30 kids, and we are now at 86. Understanding we're talking about 56 multi-bedroom units, and knowing what's happening in the housing market and with our schools, we could be looking at 56 units. I believe it's about 150 to 160 bedrooms overall, could end up yielding a number quite higher than 86, again, as the housing crunch continues. So I brought it up because I think it's a concern for us, especially with the way the buses have to go in and out of there. We have to send multiple buses into that area. Just want to see if the committee wanted to get a letter out, at least to the ZBA, and this Senator Moran and Representative Cutler.
Is this going to be a general letter, Mike, or are we going to have some data to back it up?
So I shared with you a draft of what we had sent in 2019 around the information that we had at that time. I think a lot of those concerns are still what Mike is echoing as continuing concerns. We can include the numbers for Pembroke Woods.
It's not in the pack. It was emailed out.
Yeah. The letter doesn't have the specific numbers for Pembroke Woods, but we can add that kind of as a data point, saying here's what our experience was with a similar type development.
That is even rental, which usually rentals will not have as many students as you would with dwellings. So as we start to look at lower increases in state aid, I know more students means more aid, but it's still not going to be at the level we need in order to educate a student. A large development in that part of town could change our overall, school population.
But isn't our enrollment down? I'm not taking a pro or con against, but I know our theoretically, what do we think we could handle as a student body? A student enrollment, for lack of a.
Right, so that feeds into North. So we do have space at North. I think it's with any type of development and any move-in in town in general. The needs of the students obviously are huge unknowns until they show up on that first day of school. So I think we could manage the if everyone had one child and they spanned the 12 grades, we could absolutely manage that. It would be more of a concern if there was, you know, a pocket of 20 first graders
Yeah.
coming out of there. So
Right.
depending upon the age of, or the demographic of that housing, I think could sway us needing an additional staff
I guess
or not.
that's what I was concerned about when I said data, you know,
Yeah.
if we ran into a bolus of first graders, you know, we're kind of between a rock and a hard
Right.
place. And the other thing you mentioned was just the complexity of transportation too.
Right, so that area itself geographically is tough to get in and out of, so the turning around point that, for the bus, I think, we went out and looked at it a couple years ago, it is tight there. I know this was a big thing when Patrick was on the committee when we looked at it the last
Yeah.
time, so.
How many units went in at Pembroke Woods? Do you
I
remember
think
how
we're
many?
still in phase one.
Yeah,
Never
they
mind.
never expanded.
So that has the potential to expand on top of
Right,
this
and
potential.
they had originally
full-time.
said 9 students would be the net impact at Pembroke Woods, that's where they started with 9.
Yeah.
As they were building a playground.
Just trying to kind of do, you know, sort of estimation, so if there are more phases that could come in there, plus this happening, North could really have a problem. Okay, great.
The thing, and the reason why, and kind of what has changed since we wrote the letter in 2019, 2019 or 2017?
The project first was proposed in 2017, we wrote the letter in 2019.
Yeah, I couldn't, pandemic kind of throws timing off. What's changed is, you know, there was talk about potential age restriction back then, which is what we were responding to. But then also, it's become more firm on the number of units, and then the housing market has changed.
And their proposal now is not to have an age restriction.
Correct. And if you look at the overall housing market in the town, right, it's fairly hot. And it's, you know, bringing in school-age kids. So I think what would help too is, Jim, to your point about data, breaking down the 80-plus students we have from Pembroke Woods, what they, if we match that, which, again, similar type units, what that would have for an impact.
I can do that.
Is that fair? Does anyone have an issue if the superintendent drafts another letter?
Not at all.
I guess I'm asking, are we gonna draw it from the point of informational or pro or con, if you know what I mean?
I think we have to speak about informational.
Right.
Because it's, even though personally we may feel it's not a good project,
Right.
we have, as a board, need to provide data to the people who are making the decision.
That's my point, yeah.
Right, we can't take, as
But it
much,
should be Switzerland, you know what I mean, let's say, hey,
Yeah.
this is what we think the impacts could be, let people draw their decision, pro, con, then we as a board, if we wanna take a stance, I
Yeah.
think that'd be great.
hey, if somebody can think of a positive impact out of it, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, clearly we need affordable housing, and that just doesn't seem to be the project in the right spot, in the right,
Right.
lots of things with regard to that.
Well-
That might not be the right project.
And I think to your point, we're bringing up the points that people need to consider as we move forward.
Yeah.
Yes, it may have, it's gonna bring some taxes into the community, but it's also gonna bring in expenses, right? And so just everybody understands that as this project move forward. It's not taking a stance, it's just making sure that everybody understands the concepts, right?
Yeah, a
And
house,
that was the stance in the letter in 2019,
Yeah.
just providing information, not for or against.
yeah, a house with one child is a net cost to the town, just schools alone,
Right.
so.
Right. And 66% of the units are proposed to be 3 or more bedrooms.
Pembroke Woods is limited to 2 bedrooms? There's nothing over a 2-bedroom unit there, correct?
I think that's true.
Okay.
Do you need a motion or?
Yes, can we just make it a little bit cleaner, if we can have a motion to authorize the superintendent to write a letter to the ZBA, the Senator Moran and Representative Cutler on the River Marsh 40B project, updated on the impact of schools.
So moved.
Seconded.
So motion by Jim, second by Susie. Any further discussion?
Should we copy the selectman or the town
Yeah.
manager?
We can copy the select board and the town manager, absolutely.
Okay.
Good.
No, I think that's a great idea.
Okay. Any other discussion, comments? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Fantastic. Okay. Bill schedules went around today. Now, minutes. Excuse me. I know we have one that Lance is going to want to amend. Is that the 18th?
It's the first one, it's the 27th.
So let's take that separately. So we'll put a motion, then we can make, then we can amend the minutes, and then we can take the other one separately. So is there a motion to accept the minutes of Tuesday, April 27th?
So moved.
Seconded.
So motion by Lance, second by Susie. Lance, your amendment to the minutes, which is the public budget hearing minutes.
Correct.
Yep.
The public schools, on the last page, within the vote, we have our budget at 35,500.
It's a little low.
Just needs a comma there.
But it goes 3 decimal points, so it has precision.
It does, it is precise.
So,
Oh, good catch.
I'd like to amend that to be a comma, making it 35,500,000. Might need a few more dollars to take care of the budget.
okay. So is there a motion to accept the minutes of April 27th public budget hearing as amended?
So moved.
sorry.
Yeah, it was already, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's
I
the
took it
vote time.
wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all those in favor of the April 27th public budget hearing minutes as amended?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, it's unanimous, boy. It was the
Getting
comments
tongue-tied,
screwed me
yeah.
up. Exactly. Okay, so is there a motion to approve the minutes of the regular session from April 27th, the public hearing on school choice, and the minutes from May 18th?
So moved.
Second?
So motion by Susie, second by David. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, it is unanimous also. Great. Okay, now we turn it over to the superintendent for a bunch of stuff.
Do you want to do plaques or anything? Do you want to do plaques or anything? Perfect. Awesome. So I'm gonna, we rolled A and C together, so I'm gonna turn it over to Mary Beth and Jess, and they're gonna talk a little bit about the guidance that we've received so far from DESE in regards to acceleration academies, what the planning phases look like, and as well as the opportunities that we'll be offering here this summer. I think it's important just to front load and say that this work has had many different names. In the past 5 months or even up to a year, we've called it Acceleration Academies, Achievement Gap, Learning Loss. I think we've landed on something lovely as a title, and I'm going to save that glory for Mary Beth to tell you what we're going to call it here in Pembroke. So
Jess and I just wanted to put together a few things to help sort of explain what our philosophy is, what the state's recommending, and what the actual work looks like for the summer for us coming up. I did land on interrupted learning because I really don't know that we have a lot of data yet. We have some data about early literacy for sure, but we don't have a lot of data yet about where kids are and where they're going to fall on the spectrum of the standards, and we don't have the usual benchmarks. We have our local benchmarks, but we don't have any state or national data yet to take a look at. So we'll be taking a look at that this summer. So I really do think of it as interrupted learning, and for sure we have areas that we're going to need to go back and review, and that's typical anyway of the way our curriculum is written, so that there is spiraling throughout the curriculum. However, I just do want to point out that our kids did also learn an awful lot of things that were not ever covered in the curriculum before. We have, after this year, I think, have developed quite a group of self-advocates. We have definitely have some students who have become extremely adept with technology. Our teachers are more adept with technology. The sophistication of the work that they're doing, when you think about the technology, is far greater than we ever thought. We worked for years to integrate technology, and one of the unintended blessings of the pandemic is now we have integrated technology. So I think that piece of it is something that we want to take a look at. And I also do think that the problem-solving skills transfer from whatever type of problem you are faced with as a student, whether it's a time management issue, whether it's executive functioning in terms of organizing your day, doing your work independently. I'm looking forward to seeing how some of that all plays out. So for sure, we're going to have areas where we're going to need to spiral back in terms of the curriculum and to do, some teaching or reteaching of concepts and skills. But I also think that we're going to be pleasantly surprised with some of the other outcomes. So I think of it more as an interrupted learning kind of a year in terms of interruption to the traditional way that students learn. The word that you hear often, maybe this would help. The word that you hear often in this venue right now is acceleration. And I think that's another word to clarify for us here in Pembroke. When we traditionally talk about acceleration, we usually are talking about classes that start in grade 6, and they have to do with math and ELA and moving kids forward at a faster pace. That is not necessarily what the state is talking about when they're talking about acceleration. What they're talking about in terms of acceleration is that they don't want students to come back in the fall of 2021 and for teachers to automatically go back a year and start teaching grade 3. Now that, because of the way that we have been able to structure our year in Pembroke, that would be unusual because we did have an opportunity to go back in a hybrid model and then bring our students back early. So there won't be such a tendency here to do that. But there is sometimes a tendency to do a pretest, and if there's a gap, to bring the whole class back to doing, for example, say there's a problem with the multiplication tables. So maybe the tendency would be, well, let's go back and start drilling multiplication. The recommendation is not necessarily to always go back and master that skill, but to integrate that teaching into the skill that you're trying to teach. So you want to stay on grade level. You don't want to constantly be going back a grade level and therefore not really accelerating through the grade level appropriate curriculum. And if you take a minute and think about it intuitively, it makes sense. Sometimes the words might sound a little crazy, but people don't necessarily learn on a continuum like that. People learn in fits and starts and when they're interested. So I think that the state is making a really nuanced point about making sure kids are engaged, making sure kids are hearing new things. You don't want to be hearing the same lesson over again in grade 4 that you heard in grade 3. You want to know why what you learned in grade 3 is important to grade 4 so that you can keep moving forward. So I do think that they've made a really good and nuanced differentiation of how we should be thinking about introducing the curriculum next year. Traditionally, we talk about remediation with students, and what that is a little bit different. That old sort of perspective was, oops, I didn't get to my students don't seem to know this, we're just gonna keep drilling it and drilling it and drilling it until they get to 100% on it. Well, they don't need to be 100% at it. They need to know the concept. They need to know where to use the concept. They need to know how they're getting it right and how they're getting it wrong. And of course they need practice, but they probably don't need the same amount of time on that concept that they spent the year before. I think the overarching goal of the state is to prevent boredom amongst a lot of kids, because some of the kids in the class will have identified and been able to master the concept, but to make sure that teachers are differentiating and seeing where kids are at and making sure that we're moving forward. We're not always going backwards. And that's what teachers do anyways. So I think that part of this is a little bit of explication of the obvious. We always have students at different points and who have acquired different skills and different content. So I don't think it's that big a deal, but I think it's interesting to think about the fact that they're using the word acceleration a little bit differently than we've used it in the past in Pembroke. We're talking about staying on grade level and moving forward and not focusing constantly on going backwards. And I think that is a good philosophy to embrace. When we think about how we're going to get from A to B, we have a couple of different pathways. We have some immediate interventions that Jess and I are going to talk about that will be taking place this summer. And then we're going to be working with teachers in terms of, and teachers have done this forever as well, but we're going to really work on the concept of pre-testing students, identifying the content standards and where we're going to need the mini lesson to review something, and where we can forge ahead so that we have some data in regards to what students actually need at the time. And that will allow us to do a lot of progress monitoring so that we can continue to intervene. We're also very fortunate to have a number of different electronic or digital platforms that can assist us with this. So in addition to our classroom benchmarks, and we have a lot of common units in our district that we take a look at in terms of seeing how students are progressing, we also have a number of really strong, what they call high-quality instructional materials. Lexia Core 5 is one of those, which has been identified at a state level as an excellent tool for monitoring reading progress and vocabulary acquisition. And iReady, which is the tool that we use K-6, is an adaptive math program, which if you're a student that does really well with math, it's going to keep you moving. And if you're a student that maybe you missed something, it's going to push you back. So it will help you to go back and review those skills in a fresh way, in a different way than your curriculum every day, which we deliver through the Envision program. So we have a couple of supplemental digital tools that I think are really critical to this work.
Just a quick
sure.
question.
Yep.
Some of this probably takes place in the classroom right now, that a teacher has to engage so many different students at so many different levels. So you have a classroom of 24 kids, 23 kids. They're all over the spectrum. This process seems to be calling that out more.
Right, so what our teachers generally do, both in ELA and in math blocks, is a workshop model. So for example, in a workshop model, you'd have 5 stations perhaps in your ELA workshop model. One of them is an independent reading station, one is reading aloud with the teacher, and it's about a 90-minute block, and the students move through that block. And the teacher can use discretion as to what the student is doing at that time. Part of the block might be a writing exercise. Part of the block might be some Lexia time. So in that workshop model, you're able to differentiate students out of the 24, maybe there's 3 groups, maybe there's 4 groups. Lexia is another tool that does that for you as well. So teachers have a lot of data that they can look at and say, okay, this group needs to focus on this right now. This group should be focusing on this. And as they move through those different stations, they're able to spend time with those students individually, if necessary, or in a group.
All right, that helps, because what I was afraid we would get to, and I'm jumping the gun here on your presentation, is that you would be looking for, an individual academic plan for every student in the classroom, and that would just be beyond comprehension. But what you're trying to do is create cohorts. You're trying to create these work groups then of students that are on the same learning platform or the same learning plane right now. Is that fair?
That's fair, but I would say to you that teachers do that now too.
Right.
So I think what the emphasis will be more on when you're thinking about what you're teaching, thinking about what are the prerequisite content skills that the student should have had, which maybe in prior years you wouldn't have been thinking about so hard. You might say, oh, of course they got that. You just want to be making sure. We did spend some time at our last professional development day in May having teachers identify where the areas are that they thought their kids might struggle in the next year and where the areas that they felt that they could, fly for sure. And we have some good data to pass back and forth vertically throughout the district in terms of what puts folks up.
So let me follow up on that, because I was going to actually wait for the next slide. I think you're kind of already there a little bit. When do you anticipate the move from differentiated instruction to more targeted intervention? I know it's not, there's no, okay, we're going to start it here, but do you anticipate at some point in one of the phases?
So there are different tiers of sort of intervention that we use.
A typical tiered model of intervention is what we are talking about right now, which is the whole group. So traditionally in a tiered model, you start at the whole class, providing whole class kind of interventions or prerequisite kind of drill and skill or intervening as a whole. The second part would be providing small group within the classroom. So you're doing the reading model and you're doing the 5 groups, and you're individualizing reading groups and targeting students on Lexia. And then the tier 3 is really that intervention where you're talking about removal from the classroom or an interventionist coming in and working with a set of students. So.
Exactly, because you were not going to start that day one. I know we had a conversation with Ron. I think Mary Beth, you and I had this conversation, right? Because you're not going to do it from day one because everyone's starting behind where they should be in that grade level in a normal year. Maybe. But are you anticipating at some point in that first term, first 2 to 3 months?
Yes.
Okay, get everybody and then evaluate it.
Yes.
Yeah, as soon as we get into
about
the latter part of November and December, we'll have an idea of how much disparity there is.
So we'll have data this summer, which we'll be able to look at from MCAS, and I know it's not the be-all and end-all, but it will give us something to look at. We will also have our benchmark, our common units to take a look at as well. So we'll have 2 sources of data that the content supervisors and principals will take a look at to kind of see, where are our areas of concern? Where do we need to really focus? And where are areas where kids are doing well? So that will take place definitely over the summer. In the fall, we'll be talking to teachers about this and how are we in a skilled way? And this may take some outside coaching as well. We've been talking about that. Like, what's the best way? I had a meeting today with the content supervisors. What's the best way for us to introduce this? And again, it's not such a stretch, but it might be the first time a teacher has to go back and teach a standard from the year before. So we'll be thinking about best ways to do that and how to identify it. And what the acceleration theory basically says is to do a mini lesson on it. Don't go back and spend 6 months on a standard that was in the grade before. And in some places that happens. I have not seen that happen here in Pembroke, but that's sort of the philosophy of the state and what they're thinking going forward. So you want to be targeting with mini lessons the areas where students are struggling. But you don't want to be giving them grade level work that's really not challenging either, because students, as we know, typically do better when they're challenged.
So how, because I have two questions. One, I just thought of as you were saying, and one I actually thought of when I saw this earlier today. So your second piece, if they have to go back and reteach a standard, and when you're in class, I'm thinking more at the high school level, where you might be taking something as a freshman and take it again as a junior, or sophomore and senior, how are they going to handle, I mean, I'm not asking for specifics, what are the thoughts on handling things like that where you have to build on, if you're dealing with an AP class that builds off of, a core class, what are some of the strategies that are going to be done there?
Sure, so in your packet, one of the last slides has to do with AP.
I saw that in the
Right.
specialized classes, the voluntary classes, yep.
Right, so AP traditionally has summer work anyways, which emphasizes more of a content area. It doesn't, but this summer, what we've asked teachers to do, in addition to the summer work, if they feel that there is a skill area where students would benefit from extra reinforcement. For US history, it might be document-based questions. For, I know in AP language, Jane McCormick was talking about rhetoric, focusing on rhetoric, for example. And not necessarily doing a chapter from a book or what have you, but doing some sort of mini exercises to really hone that skill in. Our AP chemistry teacher, Mrs. Otina, wants to focus on lab skills. Our kids missed a year of lab work this year. So those are the kinds of, those are the areas that we're talking about remediating at some level, accelerating remediating. But those are the areas that you'd want to focus on.
These are elective, people can choose to be in them, but when I looked at this, I'm seeing, the immediate interventions for the high needs students. Have we already identified them? Do we already know who we're already there,
Yeah,
right?
we
We're not
do.
talking about,
the
We do,
special ed
yeah.
kind of piece and the high needs,
Yeah.
yes.
okay, because that, as I look through, I'm like, wait a minute, it's
So our immediate, just to move ahead a little bit, our immediate need is our traditional ESY school, extended school year. And then Jess has developed a literacy intervention based on feedback from teachers regarding reading levels from K to 2. And we always run a summer school as well for grades 9 and 10, which tends to be more MCAS focused and based on data that we know students who fail even one course in grade 9 or grade 10 are at high risk for dropout. So by continuing to accumulate credits, that helps students so that they don't have to, can you imagine if you're struggling in English and you have to double up on them? So that it helps them to not have to double up. And there is because it is a recovery course, there is a bar that you have to hit. You have to achieve a certain percentage to be eligible to do that kind of a recovery. But we do have each summer, I would say, between 10 and 15 students per grade that participate either in our ELA or math or both, depending. This year, based on the data, we noticed that the junior class could also benefit from that type of an intervention, so we'll be offering that to our juniors as well.
thank you.
Let me ask this question, I was going to ask you later, but is there anything that is, how long does our Ingenuity license go for? Does that go just until June 30th?
August 31st.
So is there anything that can be recommended to families
Yes.
out of Ingenuity?
So we have a number of students, and this happens every year, a number of students, particularly in math, who want to accelerate, who decide at the end of grade 8 that they wish they had taken the accelerated 8th grade math course, which is an algebra course. We're going to use Ingenuity this year for that acceleration. We have a couple of kids at the high school who are going to accelerate through geometry. So we're going to be using it in that regard. I have a little bit of hesitation about using it for credit recovery for students who had difficulty with it initially. So, taking a platform where a student struggled perhaps and asking them to go back to that platform again, I'm not sure that's the best intervention for that student. So we will be using it selectively in cases where we think it makes sense and it's appropriate for students, but I wouldn't necessarily put a whole group of students, especially if they've been struggling with an online platform, into that.
Mary Beth, you're saying you're going to use it, is that just through the August 31 date and
Correct.
accelerate through the summer? We're not
Right.
renewing it for the school year?
At this point, DESE is not recommending that students return to school remotely next year, that there be no remote.
And we wouldn't use that as a tool in, say, the Compass program for any long-term?
We have a program that we use called Fuel Ed.
Okay.
And I think that we will stick with the Fuel Ed program for next year. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
so
so I can
Jessica
talk a
can
little
tell
bit
you about
about some of the summer interventions. As Susie had said, the summer school for special education students is something that we run every summer. So it is a requirement. Students qualify based on what's called a schedule modification, part of a student's individualized education program, so their IEP. So special educators take data throughout the year, specifically over times of breaks in services. So it could be after summer, it could be after a holiday break, February vacation, April vacation. And we're really looking to collect data on students that have significant regression. So significant is kind of in the terms of special ed, we think about students who may take twice as long to recoup the skills, to get back to where they were prior to the break. So if we think about a 10-day vacation, we look at students' abilities, say in a particular goal area, phonics, and the ability to decode words. At the beginning of vacation, after vacation, students who significant regression and inability to kind of recoup would take much longer than their traditional peer to kind of regain those skills. So that's how students kind of qualify for special education services in the summer. So we're looking at regression. So service providers take various points of data, at least 3 to 4 throughout the year, and much more because that's part of special education. It's constantly taking data. And then they're recommended for this, what's called the schedule modification during an IEP meeting. So the special ed team meets with all parents at least once annually. And so we're required at least once a year to consider that data and make a recommendation. The model of ESY looks very different for students based on their needs. So they can qualify in one area. So say a student who maybe has a speech and language goal, and they've shown that their ability to kind of express themselves language-wise is they've shown regression without that kind of service or break in service. And then we have our students that may need more services, so a tutorial model. So they've shown regression in ELA and in math, one or the other, and they may need more of a tutorial model. And those students may be proposed to come during the summer for twice a week, for an hour, twice a week for 2 hours. And it's really about targeting instruction in order to kind of maintain those skills so that then when they return in the fall, they haven't lost or regressed substantially. We also have students that come to our full day program. So that those are for students typically that are in our substantially separate programs. So our programs at Habermock in the elementary level, our middle and high school PACE programs, and those students would come 4 days a week typically for 4.5 hours. And so that is also for students that without that type of education, kind of with such a break in service, that there would be a significant, not only regression of skills, but the inability to kind of be ready for school. So if we think about a whole summer, for a typical student is difficult when you get back to school. And to answer some of Mike's questions about kind of that tiered model, we typically say students take about 6 weeks to kind of recoup and get back into the swing of school overall. So in special education, we start taking data typically about the second week in October, so that students are back into their routines, they have exposure to the services again, full days, etc. So in special education, our ESY program this summer will run July 6th to August 5th, so it's about a 5-week program. It runs Monday through Thursday, pretty typical design, and as I said, those kind of examples. So that's really targeting what we consider our high needs population for students that require those special education services during the summer.
2 quick questions.
Sure.
One, on the phase 3 talked about diagnostic testing and targeted instruction, which you just talked about. Are you anticipating any of the assessment tools changing from from a traditional year? And is DESE giving any additional standardized tools to at least see where everybody is standing?
There are some pilot programs that DESE has developed, and you can opt into some of them if you want to. We are in the process of looking at them and seeing how they would work for our groups. We are fortunate to have quite a compilation of years of common units, so we have some of that information. We have traditional DRA testing, we have some data points, so we do want to take a look at what DESE is promoting, but at this point, we're not sure that it's going to exactly be what we're looking for.
You just can't do so much because then you're never going to get traction, right?
Right, but I think that we have so many good programs right now that we have great data through Envision. We have great, we have data that we can say, oh, our students that drill backwards into the standards, that we can identify what standards need to be attended to.
Okay, got it. One other question, this applies to, I think, all the programs. Transportation for the students. Some of the students, I'm assuming that you've targeted.
So in special education, we're required
We're
to
required.
provide transportation if we are saying the student requires the
Needs
service.
it as part of their IEP. but
Correct.
Not all of the programs.
So in the next piece, when I talk about the summer literacy, this is an optional, so we're not providing the transportation to students. This is something in addition, but it's not a requirement.
So what you're grappling with is what we've been grappling with all along. So Acceleration Academies, as initially promoted by the state and they've kind of backed off of it, are going to really appeal to people that can fit that into their day, who can get their kids there on time.
And with the model of the targeted intervention being like a 90-minute, and that's really what a targeted intervention model looks like. So typically it's for students, say during the school year in a reading intervention, it's very specific, 5 days a week for 30 minutes or 5 days a week for 60.
Yep.
So during the summer, the model is a little bit longer as we're modeling kind of that literacy block that Mary Beth talked about. So we're going to model kind of a very traditional reading block, but in a shorter amount of days or times. And so the blocks are 90 minutes.
But your concern is the student that can't get there.
I'll have a different ask when we get to the AP classes because it's a different type of learner. Where I'm looking at, because I had this, as soon as I read this when it got sent out this afternoon, it was one of the first things I honed in on.
Right.
These are students who we need them to be in the early intervention program. It's only a couple of days a week, I get that. And they need to be in there.
But this is why we believe that our intervention should really be universal. They should really be initially as a tier 1 intervention for all groups of kids, and then we should be doing it during the school year when we have students with us who are able to get here so that we're not missing students. So one of the things that we struggled with the idea, a couple of things we struggled with. One is staffing an Acceleration Academy in August for students, which is what was recommended. As you can imagine, teachers are extremely fatigued at this point, and the thought of coming back and providing that level of support for 2 weeks before school starts was not that appealing, especially when I sent it out in April. But even then, I would say to you, I really believe that these should be universal interventions. This should be what we're doing as a district for all students, not just for kids that can get there.
And that kind of ties to my question, because I'm thinking of kids that are coming in, sophomores now into juniors, which is a critical year as you're prepping to get your grades where you want them to be for college apps, but also the juniors that are now moving into the senior, there's no more time left. So if they're behind, how are we doing, is there a special effort with those two particular groups to position them well for their ongoing education?
So aside from math, and maybe a little bit in the sciences, some of these courses are so discrete that it's really about skill development.
Because the AP piece kind of comes into play there, I think, for many.
Right.
But I'm thinking about students that may not be, looking at the AP or STEM track, but they still need to kind of get caught back up there, just to position well.
But I think that what we have to really be careful about is what are we catching up? So if you're a junior and you're in U.S. history, you finished your U.S. history year and now you're moving into an elective year. It's all new content.
Yeah.
So, there are going to be areas that you're going to need to spiral back to U.S. history and understand, but it's new content. So it's not the content areas in many of our disciplines that we're as concerned about as it is the skills. It's the writing, it's the presentation skills, it's the technology skills, it's the ability to synthesize data and information, right? To read charts, read graphs, be able to communicate. So those skills are skills that we will continue to work on, but I'm not sure that they're and I would say except for math, because I do believe that there is a more cumulative process happening in the math disciplines where teachers will be cognizant of having to reteach some things.
And I will say, I worry a little bit just because I know our students as well as our staff have been overwhelmed for 18 months. So to be doing this, kind of catching up while learning, could continue that bit of a frenzy for them. So
I think
the
it will
support
be,
component for that,
right. And I think one of the things that I probably should have integrated into this presentation is all of this has to happen in an environment where kids are welcomed, feel like they belong, where people are supported. So this presentation, unfortunately, doesn't really pay homage to the fact that social emotional learning also has to be really.
Because I just worry.
That's your first thing, right? You have to
Yeah.
have those relationships with kids. But I really believe that teachers this year focused on what we would call in our earlier years maybe power standards or essential prerequisite standards. They hit the heavy hitters.
I think the messaging is going to be really important. Speaking to any number of people that was, say, on the Edgenuity platform, especially knowing that I had a student that was on that platform, I think there was a recurring theme of I felt good, I got something done, but as soon as they signed in and they saw red, they're like, oh, it was like a punch in the stomach. I just don't want a message somehow inadvertently sent where we're trying to help that sort of is sending that red alert, you're behind kind of a thing, and punching these poor students who have done, like you mentioned earlier, things that students before them have never done. We need to really celebrate the fact that that success of the technology, just the waking up. I mean, there are adults that want to really curl up in the fetal position at this point after this year.
Right.
So I just really, I guess, I love that we're working to try to catch them up, but this is going to be a delicate walk so that we don't send a negative message accidentally.
Absolutely.
Right, and the whole class intervention, I think, takes some of the stressor off the I'm behind, because it's an activity
Perfect.
that everyone's
Yes.
doing. And I think,
Yeah, and
you know,
that's-
our focus at the beginning of the year, when the teachers joined us a few days before kids, as Mary Beth alluded to, was to give them some coaching on how to do that. How do I restructure where I was gonna start so that I'm catching up without them feeling like we're catching up? So
Perfect.
it's like we're moving
Perfect.
through content.
Which
You're,
is,
you're,
again-
you're hearing me. I love that. Thank you.
Which is again why you don't want to go back and say, okay, now we're going to go back to third grade. We don't.
Yeah.
That's not the
I
message
just-
that we want to be sending.
There are very few people offering anything this summer.
Yeah.
For lots of reasons.
Yeah.
Yep.
For the reasons that you pointed out is the main reason. So in speaking with superintendents, and I know Mary Beth and Jess have talked to their job-alike peers, you're creating a culture of have and have-nots. I was able to get my kids somewhere for 90 minutes from now, and regardless, I'm gonna have to kind of start everybody there on the first day of school, because not everybody was able to get there.
But my understanding of this program, and tell me if I had a misunderstanding, because I was talking with a parent about this particular program. This is a targeted program. This is not all K through 2.
No. So K-2 students were assessed mid-year, as we typically do.
Right.
And any student that was not meeting the benchmark at the time of the spring data collection was invited to participate.
Correct.
And as Mary Beth shared, it was difficult to structure the late in the year with hiring the staff, making sure that we're, giving access to any student not. So we have about 140 students invited.
Okay, so
I've received the kind of responses aren't due back till tomorrow, but about 80% of what I've gotten back have been yeses, and students are coming, parents are providing transportation. I've had a couple calls just clarifying kind of the program and the structure. I haven't had complaints about or concerns, I would say, so far. People are happy and understand kind of the constraints around it. But it is a very targeted intervention. And this is really based on, not only kind of the model of looking at the interrupted learning, but based on the feedback from the teachers when we met in, I'm trying to remember,
January,
I was going to say
May,
which,
yeah.
the May date as well, but looking for what the teachers thought the best or the biggest concern area. And
So-
that would be the early literacy model, not being able to do a lot of the things they typically do with the small group instruction.
And we
So-
do have the Y running this year as well, so there's the
Yep.
option to pair to make a full day
Make
off
a full
for
day
your
off.
child, which I
Okay,
think
good.
was part of some of the concern we had.
Yeah, that was going to be some of my encouragement, having been a part of that. And actually, when I was younger, we partnered. I was in the Whitman Hanson school system, and they called it Camp Plus. We spent the first half of the day in the school and went to Camp Kiwanee in the afternoon, and it was a joint venture that was done. So those partnerships definitely help build that opportunity to be able to spend the day and work your scheduling out for those parents that have to work. I think you guys summed it up tremendously well, in the fact of all these kids are pretty much, as much as we like to think our kids are catching up and in school is doing well, as a group, we're at this point with the interrupted learning, and I think the value of being able to do that takes some of the stigma away from that, and everybody's in the same boat, and we're working together to get ourselves back. We don't know what that's going to look like, right? I've seen huge progress since my son's gone back into school because that's where he thrives in the social environment, but I don't know if he's catching up where he needs to be, right? So we're not going to know that data for a while, and this is 10, 15 years down the road, we're not going to know how this last 18 months has impacted our students. So I think the patience that we're taking and the ability to sort of adapt as we go along is great.
As we get more data too, I hope that we'll be able to offer, with that Titan time, K to 12, we do have a block every day, and that block could be utilized in ways where we're bringing in tutors, which we've done before at the high school for MCAS. There are ways for us to bring in additional support during our day to assist students, and we're cognizant of that there may be some budget implications to that, but that may be what we need, and we know through research that one-on-one targeted intervention is the most powerful. So,
sorry, I'm going to take us back for a third time to the same thing.
What do we do?
No, I'm not looking for a different answer. I'm trying to.
Is this
no, not at all. I'm trying to. I got the question.
Kathy's going to put it side by side.
I got a follow-up, and then I get another question to the follow-up. So you said roughly 80% yes, which would be 112 coming and 28 not.
So the data,
There we go.
the answer sheets aren't due back till tomorrow, but before this meeting, this afternoon, I did look at kind of our data sheet.
I'm not going to hold you. Here's my issue, or here's my question. Say it does sit at 112 and 28, right? If we're looking at those 28, I would still be curious of how many of those, some of those 28, they're going away for the summer, there's an issue, they cannot, I get it.
But remember, the 112 that are yes now are not necessarily a yes on the day that we're
On the
asking
day
them to show
I
up.
completely understand.
Because it's free and you're not really making a commitment.
But at that point, they're making a family decision.
Right.
Here's where I'm struggling, I think you'll know where I'm going. How many of the hard no's are because they can't pull it off? And I understand partnering with the Y and all the other stuff.
No one has given me that for a firm reason. I have camps, we have this, we already hired somebody, we're using this model. Certainly I've taken feedback. I've talked to 2 parents on the phone. I've checked in with all the principals, a couple questions about kind of the model. We tried to do the best we could for the extension of the time. So typically, like I said, it's 5 times 45 is a targeted intervention, but obviously, dropping your child off for 45 minutes, you're literally probably sitting in the parking lot. So we thought 90 minutes would be enough time for families that wouldn't be inconvenienced to drop off and pick up as well. So
okay, I'm just trying to, like I said, I talked to one of the 112 and they were ecstatic about it and they were going to drive their kid every.
Right, but of the 28 that don't come, the support still exists for them on the first day of school, right? So we have reading specialists.
Here's the thing, I don't want anyone to lose the opportunity because they don't have access to either the transportation and then transportation of the child, whatever that piece is there something within our control that we can help that 28?
Right, we can follow up with the hard notes.
That's all I'm trying to get to, because I think when I read this earlier, everything here I really like. Like that we can do it. I don't like why we have to do it, right? We would have preferred to not have a global pandemic. That was not in our control. No. But that was my big thing there. So
that's the summer literacy program. The credit recovery is a little bit different. As I said before, that's really based on data that we have regarding students having to double up with their core math or English and how difficult that is and how often that ultimately leads students to either delayed graduation or dropping out. So that's certainly something we want to head off as soon as we can and to give kids a break. The kids that are invited to this tend to come. They get themselves here because they are truly incentivized to have a better year next year, and they figure for 12 days I'm going to get through this. We have some great teachers that are involved with this work who've been doing it for a few years, and They do a lot of what we just talked about. They work with each kid, they figure out where they're at, they figure out what they're gonna need to move ahead in their next course, and what are the skills that we're going to focus on for that 30 hours, which will allow them to recover credit in the class. So it's usually a great group. Erin and I oftentimes bring them breakfast on Fridays. We have some fun with them. They're really nice kids. And then the AP workshops are a little bit different this year. A couple of students and a few parents mentioned kids being anxious about skills, and when I mentioned it to the teachers and said we'd be happy to support that if that's the case, a number of teachers jumped in and said, well, here's, my fear was that I didn't want it to be a mandatory thing where a kid had to be there, because families are so pressured over the summer and kids are working and there's lots of things going on. But they're going to try to offer some flexible times and work on skills. And I mentioned some of those before, like the lab skills, the DBQ writing, rhetoric, trying to think, there's a bunch of other things in there. There's some things regarding AP government called free response questions that are part of that exam. So there are different styles of writing that the AP teachers are willing to work on. And that, to me, is it's more about skills. I don't want them teaching chapter 1 and then kids coming on, in September and then being like, wait a minute, we did this in the summer, That's not the goal. The goal is really to meet kids where they're at, and if they are anxious or if they want to get a little bit of extra feedback, to give them that.
Any chance in the AP to, maybe not do a virtual, but at least record the classes? Because if you're looking at 10 hours, somebody's going to be on vacation for one of them and miss a section. Is it possible?
I don't know. I don't know that it wouldn't be. Most of those teachers are extremely adept with technology, so I'd be willing to float it out there. I didn't phrase it like that. If we looked at it as
if anybody's
interested,
interested, just I'm not saying to have everybody go virtual, but I'm just trying to think.
Yep.
Is there a way for if,
sure.
if somebody wants to go back?
Absolutely willing to explore that with them.
My other thing, actually, is more of a comment. We should put on the future agenda items. We should get kind of bi-monthly updates. We'll get frequent updates, but I'm thinking if we go monthly, where we get a presentation. If we could, I'm thinking August, October, December, and February. Thinking anything after February is going to be tied to the budget, and August, what's kind of how recap of the summer. What's the plan for September? October tells us what happened the first month.
Yep, got it.
Yep.
So, yeah, now if we could drop August, October, December, and February for interrupted learning updates. And should we also consider, or when do you think would be the time to talk about budget impacts of, we held back on some of the ESSER and CARES and whatever else you want to call it. When should we be revisiting that? Is it September? Is it October?
I think it's more of an October timeline. This work, the summer literacy work here is funded from Title I. The other programs you see here are traditional programs that we run, or are kind of a supplement to our curriculum work that was done. So I think we're going to start talking about hitting that money when we're talking about bringing other people in.
Yeah, I heard that. Your comment earlier about bringing additional support coaching staff in.
Which we've done both in the Title I program and at the high school program.
Anybody disagree with that timeline and approach?
No, I think
Jimmy, you
that's
don't?
good.
The only point, I don't know if it kind of came up, at least in my mind. I think everything is fantastic, ladies. I admire the work you're doing. But you mentioned, teacher fatigue, which to me is huge. I'm a little bit worried about student fatigue. I've got a couple of kids, I've got the junior high and middle school, and you talk to some of their friends, and they're like, they're almost checked out now. I know there's a couple of weeks of school, but they're like, Mr. Boyle, this isn't fun anymore.
That's exactly what we really slowed down on that Acceleration Academy idea for August. Because many of the families that we were talking to were just saying, my kids just need a break. They just need a summer break where they get to play outside or work, or just a break.
That's some of your no's, and it makes a lot of sense.
And I respect that, and I think that people know their own children, and that they need to do what's best for them. But I don't want to offer something that not all students have access to either. So we want to be sure that whatever interventions or whatever diagnostic work we're doing, it includes all students. So I think trying to operate on the confines of the school year is a much better plan. Even if we do something on Saturdays, even if we start something after school, at least we have our students here, and it's part of their traditional cultural school day. So.
Right. No, I agree. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, we'll move on to goals.
That information's in your packet.
I know it is. Okay, so, you have some red lines, I know, let's put it this way, Susie is the one without the heading, I am the one with the heading. The only reason why is I know my notes. I didn't have a chance to read yours
Yeah,
earlier.
sorry, I don't know why I got so crazy with the colors.
Yeah, so
I don't
we
know.
took it out of that beautiful Word document that you sent with the blue and the yellow, and just put it in the same format as
I've
that.
been working so many things at one time, it's like, I'll just color code so I can see where I put something, sorry.
Which
No worries.
I'm glad you said that and did that
was a lot.
because.
Natalie
It
did it. I
would've
sent
been
it to Natalie, and I said, this one needs some help.
Sorry, Natalie.
So,
A little bit longer and I won't be your secretary anymore, it'll all be good.
okay. All right, so we have some updates to it. I know we talked about just getting this set so we can go into and have a framework to work on for the first July meeting, so we're not, this isn't dragging through the summer and into the fall. So, if you see, in looking at this, some of Susie's comments are very similar to mine. What I would ask is, and I don't have a problem putting them together into a new draft. So why don't I
Yeah.
do, I can put it together. You get plenty of other stuff to do. I'll take this, if everybody's okay, I will put it together into one common document, so you see the updates from both of us. And then we will take that as a first read the next time we meet.
And if there's anything anybody wants to add.
Get them to me and I'll put it together.
So Mike, the only thing I wanted to add
Yeah,
very
sure,
quickly
go
is
ahead.
under key actions number 2. I think the idea of the bi-monthly roundtables is great to solicit feedback from constituents. I would also ask that we have some sort of a plan of action to ensure that there's a process for consideration. Because I continue to get feedback or comments from folks saying, hey, I've offered a suggestion or I've offered an idea, and I never hear from anybody. And that's not just the school district. I mean, that's life. But I think if we can have just a little bit more consideration around what is the plan once somebody provides a recommendation and or feedback from that roundtable, so that they know that at least there's some serious thought given to the time they've put forward to contribute.
Yep.
That's all.
Otherwise, people stop suggesting things if nobody
Right.
does it.
Yeah, they just, it's like, you just don't want to create a black hole.
No, it's
Long as
absolutely,
they're
excellent point. Yeah.
But I think, if anything pops up in the next day or so, we can shoot you an email.
Yeah, and I'll put together I'll combine the documents.
Okay.
Because I have mine, I can add Susie's revised document much easier. We good? Everybody okay with that? It's just, we need to get these done, I know, excuse me, potential for a lot of us not to be here, but at least, it just, if we don't have something for the next committee to use, this is going to be a problem, as we try to navigate through all the challenges we do. Okay, so consideration of a approval for the digital learning job description.
Right, so when we talked about this position during the budget process, we talked about it as a technology integrator. I think what you have in front of you better captures what we're looking for as the goal of this position and the type of person that we're looking for. I'm confident that there are teachers on our staff that would meet every single one of these qualifications. I will say, and we did talk about this during the budget cycle, there may be members of our staff that are hesitant to apply for this because we did have this position once, we eliminated it, we've added it back, we've eliminated it, and now we're adding it back again. But we do want to make sure that we are finding a qualified applicant that meets the needs of where we are at right now. And we are in a significantly different place than we were when we posted for the job the first time, I think in 2017, which I think I shared the job posting.
Erin, can you remind me, was this one of the ones that because of technology, DESA is asking us to have grade state?
No, so
No?
this is,
Okay.
with the influx of technology that we were able to accomplish with some of the ESSER and CARES money, we have 2,600 student devices floating around out there, and we do not anticipate remote learning as an option for next year for folks. So we want to make sure that teachers have the support and training to integrate that technology and those devices in their classroom instruction, as well as, the support to try new things. You know, our teachers have learned a lot with technology over the past 18 months, and we want to make sure that they continue to grow and use those skills in their classroom when students are in a more traditional model. And that's scary. I think we've had a couple of teachers come and talk in the past about, you know, having the backup plan for when nothing works, and, you know, having a dedicated digital learning specialist, I think, takes some of that burden off of them. You know, Brandon has kind of functioned in this role for us at the same time of being the director of technology, and I think, you know, we're in a place where our staff is ready to move forward at a much faster pace, and we want to make sure that we're able to support them with that.
How tough is it to find somebody like this these days? Is this going to be a tough search, or do you
So
think
there's
we'll have
no licensure necessarily associated with this type of position, so anybody that has any certification through DESE is able to apply for this. I think what we see with some of our newer educators is that they're coming out of teacher prep programs with a lot of this experience and expertise. As a district, we've offered a lot of Google Educator trainings. Brandon has offered a lot of PD, so a lot of our staff already meet these qualifications. It takes a really special person to take that step out of the classroom. And so when Sarah McNulty was the one that filled this position for us when we had it the first time, and it was a big hurdle for her to get one step away from the kids and be supporting teachers. So it does take, I think, a unique person. This is a good step between teaching and administration, right? There's kind of a one step away from the classroom, but not totally away from the classroom. So I do think that there's a pool of applicants for this position in particular.
And with the sense of humor, will they have to tell 3 jokes before they finish the interview? Or?
So Brandon has a very dry sense of humor, so we'll see if their humor matches my humor.
But I think they do need
Because you just
a
have to
humor
laugh
kind of
sometimes.
role.
When you're dealing with technology, you just have to laugh, right? So Mary Beth and I all night have been checking the school committee mailbox from our phones because my district issued computer that's plugged into a wired connection has no internet.
Still not there.
So we'll just,
Oh, that's
right?
Whoops.
Yeah.
Another issue. I have 2 comments, that's why I read this earlier. One is in section 1, facilitates the development of curriculum. Are they facilitating, or are they collaborating, or are they actually creating?
So,
Go ahead.
sorry.
No worries.
They're taking their specific digital literacy skills, and they're taking those standards and integrating them into a social studies class or into another class. So
Okay.
they're making sure that, you know, a good digital citizen, that message about, you know, how you're supposed to be behaving online and what where your responsibilities are as a digital citizen are
Okay.
upheld.
Okay, because I was thinking, to me, not that it makes a big deal, but that would be collaborate because they have to work with somebody else. Because they would facilitate means that, to me, it means they're the one leading it, and I didn't think they were.
Well,
They could be.
Yeah, they could be,
They could be,
especially when it
okay.
comes to the digital piece, you know, like, for example, Brandon, when he goes into classrooms and a teacher says to him, I want to do, you know, I want to do a green screen thing.
Yep.
He might, before he goes through the process with students, review, well, these are, I mean, he won't say these are the standards for digital literacy, but he would explain, you know, these are your responsibilities when you're putting something online, these are your responsibilities when you're, you know, this could go anywhere, you always want to be cognizant. So he's, you know, those would be integrated, so maybe integrated is better than either facilitate or collaborate, Mike.
Okay.
Because you're making sure that those standards are making their way throughout the entire curriculum, that they don't stand alone in some, you know, way off place.
Fair enough. So just the last question, on the top one, on the back side of the page, participation in development, monitoring, ethical technology use, is that because it's more in Brandon's world than this position, or what am I missing there?
So we, this year with the influx of devices, have purchased Goguardian, which is, you know, that software and internet monitoring software. This person would help monitor that as well. So
Okay.
Brandon is doing that right now.
Got it, okay. That's why it's participation. I wasn't sure about that one, I didn't understand. Okay.
And that's one sort of level of, that you can use. There are other ways that you can monitor student technology use, and so that he would probably just want somebody to be up on those things as well.
Which is
to know
fine.
what's out
I
there.
just wasn't sure if that was this role or Brandon's, that's why I was confused.
Mhm.
Just, and the only comment is professional development piece in this is a lot stronger than it was in the other job description. So I was a big fan of that. I thought that was really That was important.
Yeah, Brandon has, been the go-to guy for professional development, and he's been really good about identifying faculty members who are excelling in certain programs and having them present, and so that's become a huge part of his job district-wide.
Fantastic, okay. So is there a motion to accept the job description as presented, unless there are other comments?
So moved.
Motion by Jim, second by?
Second.
David.
Sorry.
You missed your opportunity.
Beat both of us.
Sorry, Lance.
I get the
So
next-
was there any other further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, fantastic.
It's like a great opportunity for somebody.
Okay, all right, so two things real quick. One, we do have a potential meeting date for the 22nd, which is town meeting, which may or may not need, depending upon what we have for agenda items. But before we do that, because if we don't have that meeting, this would be the last meeting for Mr. Agnew. So,
It is.
yes, Jim has chosen not to seek re-election. We appreciate his time here, and we understand, unfortunately, bigger things call with regard to employment, and Jim changing the world of healthcare right in front of our eyes. So Jim, just want to, on behalf of the committee, administration, and all the stakeholders in town of Pembroke, thank you for your 3 years. Definitely bring a lot of good dialogue to the discussion. We appreciate that. Wish you the best. We know you're not going anywhere, but wanted to give you a little
Mike,
bit
I
of token
appreciate
of
it.
our
Everyone.
appreciation.
Thank
All
you.
my colleagues. Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure work.
Okay.
Thanks, Lance.
So, with that, we do have an executive session. I'll take a motion to move into executive session pursuant to Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy for collective bargaining as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the legal position of the school committee as declared by the chair, after which no further business will be conducted.
So moved.
So motion by Lance, second by Susie. Lance?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Susie?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight, and we will see you at town meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
No, thank you
Thank you.
for years.